Okay, so first I want to actually step back before we talk specifically about exercise and talk about the big picture of sort of the motor system. Because when you look at how well you can move and how well you can move against gravity, it depends not only on strength but on other things like energy availability, muscle strength, but also endurance. So strength is one thing, being able to do something in a short period of time, endurance, being able to do it over a long period of time, they're all sort of important. The skeletal system integrity, which is probably more important on some level for people that are still growing, so some of the younger people who have the later onset. And the other thing that I think is kind of important is that to think about the fact that the motor manifestations can be primary or secondary. And so what I mean by that is that the primary thing is that there's an issue with strength or not enough strength, so that's where things start. But then people who have an issue with strength are usually really smart about using their balance to help. And also tell me if you can't hear me, my voice doesn't work too well. So people that have a pure issue with strength or not enough strength will, everyone I've ever known has had excellent balance. And so people learn how to use their balance in a really good way to line up their body so that it helps them with more functional strength than their muscles can give from a primary standpoint. But whenever you do that, you may be paying a price because of the mechanics or the situation that you're in. So we have to look at how that affects everything and ways to maximize the benefit in all those different components. Okay, so I think some of the biggest questions at this point that people are looking at is what about exercise, what type and what amount is best. And that's always been a little bit unclear. I mean, it's always been unclear before there was myozyme, but now that there's myozyme, the question is, how does that influence somebody's capacity to exercise? And so a lot of these things are not yet well known. So we'll talk about what we do know and what we need to know in the future. And then how that does affect the musculoskeletal system and how that then affects function and development or just function in an adult. So I think the good news is that there are all kinds of answers that have been evolving. There's a lot more work being done than used to be done. And so people are contributing in terms of what they know about people's diagnoses, how optimal management can help, and how all these things fit together. And then I think the other important thing is whatever guidelines there are that are out there, everybody is really different. And so, like for me as a physical therapist, as we say in the States, or as a physio, it's always really important for me to have somebody tell me how the advice I give them actually works with their body, because everyone's a little different. So I can tell you what I know about physio, but you can tell me how well that fits when you try something. And I rely on people to be their own experts about their body, and I think that's sort of the best way to work with a physio if you're doing that. Okay, I don't know if you're all have heard this sort of model before, but it sort of fits in with the previous speakers. And this is what physical therapists and people with rehab use, this sort of framework to look at things. So, and this used to be by the World Health Organization, and the Nagy model had all different names. And what they do is, and I do think this is important, to look at every different level. And like the last speaker, when he was talking about how to measure whether something's helpful or not, I think it's important to pick a measure in all these different areas. So for example, in pathophysiology, you would want to look at the effect of exercise or the effect of myozyme on the muscle itself. And so people look at that by doing a muscle biopsy and say, okay, what difference does it make? What biomarkers can we see? You know, how is it really affecting the muscle? And that's one thing. Okay, the next level is, how does it affect an impairment that has come from the muscle, which would be strength or flexibility? So it's important to measure those things. So you look inside the muscle and see what the positive impact is. You look at how the muscle works to see what positive impact there is. Then you look at whether there's a functional limitation or not, which would be something like how far somebody can walk, or whether you can get up out of a chair or not, those sorts of things. Because that's an important level on which to measure things, I think, for whether you're helping somebody. And then your disability or ability, and that means whether you can actually do what you want to do with your life. And that's an important category to remember, that is a different level than something like strength, because if you have the right equipment, then you can avoid having too much of a disability no matter what your strength is. So for example, if you know the important thing in life is to be able to get around independently and do what you want, then if your muscles work well enough to do that with walking, that's one thing, or if you need something with a motor on it, that's another thing. But again, it's to sort of measure the big picture of your life, like how much is the issue with strength getting in the way of you doing what you want to do in your life or not, and the goal, of course, should be to not let it. So as a physical therapist, that means it's important to pay attention to a whole bunch of other things like equipment and technology to make somebody, to limit the amount that an issue with strength would influence them. And then there are side limitations, which mean, again, people can participate. The newest model is this, which everyone over here took on before we did in the States, but now in the States, everyone's using this model too, because it's sort of a more positive description. So they talk about looking at issues within the body, which were called impairment in the old system, looking at which activities somebody can do, which used to be called, say, limitations, and to look at participation. And so the real goal is to let people participate, to make sure you're helping so people can participate in whatever they want to, which is really kind of the bottom line for anybody. Okay. So again, if you're looking at Pompeii, you're looking at the primary myopathy, and to understand there's many details about that when we look at strengthening, to look at what secondary musculoskeletal systems could have occurred and protect against those getting in the way, and then to look at how to help with function and participation, which is through technology, any energy conservation, things like that. Okay, so that's kind of the big picture against which we're going to be talking about strengthening. So hopefully that's somewhat helpful. Okay, so you probably all know this, but I thought it's good to look at. So what actually happens inside a muscle? Now, does everyone know this so much by heart that I should just skip it? Yes? No? No? Okay, fine. So, so for me as a physical therapist, I work with people that have all different things, and so it's really important for me to know what's going on in somebody's muscle before I prescribe exercise or recommend exercise. And so for some muscle problems, like with something like Duchenne, there's something wrong with the membrane around the muscle cell, and so there are ways that makes the muscle fragile that you have to be careful with exercise. With Pompeii, the thing is there's this accumulation of glycogen, so you all know that. And that can be inside the lysosome, and that's sort of sitting within the muscle. So why am I harping on this? Well, if you help somebody use their muscle, then there has been some thought over the years that if you do too much exercise or too heavy-duty exercise, that can be hard on your muscles because it can increase the amount that the glycogen would leak out of the lysosomes and cause additional damage. So in most diagnoses in which there's an issue with strength or not enough strength, the muscles are sort of fragile for one reason or another. And so it's often important to not overdo exercise or not do exercise that is too aggressive. And you probably all, does everyone you probably already know that if you over-exercise, you're kind of wiped out the next day. And so I think that's important to pay attention to. Anyway, so this is sort of the muscle physiology for why that is. So it's because of this buildup of the glycogen, and when that leaks out of the lysosome, that can cause more muscle damage.